Welcome to Flaming Hot Takes with Clay and Salix. Today we're discussing two fire management strategies, controlled burning
and thinning and pruning,
and their effects on ecosystem, industry, and community.
Why don't we start off talking about ecosystem benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. So with controlled burning, after a low-intensity fire goes through, you're going to see this increase in biodiversity and this creation of successional stages where plants in the understory that are now free of competition can grow up and really start to restore that environment and create a healthy biodiverse ecosystem.
But I think thinning can do that as well. As the canopy opens up, it allows for more sunlight to reach the understory, and the plants there will grow better.
Yeah, that definitely can have an effect, but one of the things that's missing with thinning that you get in controlled burning is a thick layer of nutrient deposit. So after those small understory plants burn off, you're left with this nice layer of nutrients that can be used to grow and regenerate those plants.
Yeah, that's true. But even when you prune, that coarse and fine woody debris will decompose and add to the duff, which retains moisture. It also allows the carbon to continue being sequestered in that organic matter. And you don't have to release all that carbon dioxide and smoke, really, to the surrounding area as well.
Yeah, organic matter is definitely important, of course, in the ecosystem to foster that regeneration. But when you have ecosystems that have evolved with fire and they are not burned for a long period of time, you can have an increase in disease and invasive fungi and other species that start to appear in that forest. And by having controlled burns come through, it kind of acts as a cleanse for that forest and can allow for a lot of healthy regeneration that you're not going to get from selective thinning.
Okay, but what if I'm a mouse or some other cutesy little animal that calls the woodlands its home? I don't really want a big fire in my house.
I think that for that particular mouse, yes, controlled burning's not going to be fantastic, but the hope is that in the long run, by increasing the biodiversity over time through many small-scale burns, you're able to create a long-lasting biodiverse ecosystem so that we can get the most out of our conserved areas and all wildlife have a healthy ecosystem.
Very true. I think the other benefit to thinning is the fact that we can repair a little bit of the increased tree density that we've created from replanting with a greater density than was previously observed in our forests. Thinning allows us to make a little bit of profit while also reversing this issue.
Yeah, I think that serves as a great transition into our next topic, industry.
So I think that thinning is really beneficial to industry because of the ability to choose what trees and ladder fuels you're eliminating. So you can still sometimes get some retained value from the forest that you're selectively thinning, where burning is a little bit more unpredictable. Another big benefit that helps balance the scales of cost and benefit is the fact that it requires a lot less human labor and materials to enact. There's not as much time spent making burn plans or hiring fire crews, and it can also take place at any time of the year, where controlled burning is limited to a fairly specific window of time in the spring and fall.
Yeah, it can definitely be a lot of regulation and a lot of management to do controlled burning, but even in timber plots, and especially in areas that are not producing timber, the benefits for your ecosystem can also spill over into the industry as well, because if you're managing for multiple values and starting to look at your other ecosystem services such as tourism or non-traditional forest products, you can generate a lot of revenue in addition to your timber that is not being severely damaged by these low-intensity fires. Mm-hmm. And you can start to get a more rounded chart of ecosystem services that you wouldn't see just with selective logging.
I would say that this is true. However, I believe that thinning can be done in a way that doesn't greatly diminish the ecosystem services and tourism prospects of an area.
One more point that I would make is that you can incorporate a lot of traditional ecological knowledge with Western science when you reincorporate fire onto the landscape. And that can be really beneficial for industry to build those relationships and start to manage forests in a way that they were historically.
I think that's really great.
Yeah.
I totally agree with incorporating Indigenous perspectives. And this is great for fire management on a slightly smaller scale, just because of that narrow window and efficient cost that is incurred by planning and executing a controlled burn. And I think that one of the biggest draws to thinning and pruning is that it can be done on a much larger scale over a longer period of time. And finally, let's talk a bit about community.
Yeah, so with controlled burning, it's really beneficial in the process of truth and reconciliation to have these communities working together, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to work towards solutions that can benefit biodiversity in the long term. And these can be a sort of building block or a jumping off point for community involvement and kind of a collective establishment of learning.
I agree, and I really look forward to seeing BC Wildfire Service work much more closely with Indigenous communities in the future. I think that's going to be really great to see. I feel like thinning and pruning leaves a much less scarring, visible impact on the forest, though, whereas a burn kind of looks a little bit ugly for a while afterwards, which might affect the tourism prospects in the area.
Yeah, it can definitely be kind of jarring in the short term and not necessarily what we think of as forest. So a lot of time we think of this continuous canopy as what is pristine and what is wilderness, but a lot of the time what these forests looked like in the past was a lot more open with a lot more diversity of landscape. And so while that burned area might look a little bit jarring in the short term, the hope is that it will come back with a lot more biodiversity in the future and be a much more rich and plentiful ecosystem that people will want to come see for a lot of different reasons.
Very true. I think one of the primary points about both of these methods is their impact on the safety of the community in areas where wildfires pose a massive risk to property damage and loss. I think thinning is much more safe in this regard, in that sometimes controlled burns do get out of control, and that's a massive liability to everyone in the community and also industry and woodlot owners.
Yeah, absolutely.
And such. I've never really heard
lots of risks with it.
A runaway thin. Oh no, the branches are just falling off.
So bad.
Salix, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room. As we progressed through our research, we discovered that there's actually a lot of limitations to both of these methods.
One thing that we definitely wanted to touch on was that a lot of these practices are happening at a very small scale right now.
Yeah, like last year, controlled burns maybe covered 2,000 hectares of forest in comparison to the 2.8 million that burned, and the 55 million of hectares of forest that we have in BC in total.
There's also a huge cost associated with it, right?
Yeah, generally costs for both thinning and controlled burns are about $2,000 per hectare, versus when you total up the cost of firefighting for 2023, the most catastrophic wildfire season, you get a cost around $385 per hectare to fight these fires.
Yeah, so the gap is huge there between what it would cost to control burn versus how much it costs per acre that we're losing right now to wildfire. I think one thing that we would also add is that there have been cases in the past where you've had runaway fires, and it's created a lot of adversity to an implementation of controlled burning because people are scared of property damage. And it's definitely a real concern, and there's a lot of legislation and policy that goes into making controlled burns safe, but that can also cost a lot of money, as we've covered.
Welcome to Salix.
Welcome to Salix.
Uber epic.
Uber epics and packed with biodiversity. Controlled burning's the best!
We're
Tier
podcasting it up right here from inside the fox.
No!
There you have
Don't
it, folks.
prove that!
I shower with fire.
I light myself on fire. It's great.